Welcome back everyone to Why Did the Nations Rage. In this video we will conclude the series of painting vlogs on this here painting called Sea Under Siege. And right away I just showed you the original drawing that this painting is based off of, and I was showing you the walking cane or walking stick that Tiberius has there. And it's a pretty intricately hand-carved wooden cane that I have been procrastinating and blocking in up till now, but I'm gonna go in for it here. I'm adding Payne's Gray just to kind of give it its initial shape. And as soon as I get done doing that, I'm gonna move in with some Van Dyke Brown on top of it. That's what I'm putting there. And then finally I'm going to go in with the titanium white mixed with the blending glaze. It was actually a little bit challenging to try to figure out where the highlight was supposed to fit at, and the walking cane itself, the design in it is a little bit complicated. I tried to simplify it. I realized up at the top that I was actually making it way too complicated, and way more complicated than it actually had to be. So I decided as I moved down to simplify the shapes that I'm putting in here with the highlight. It almost looks like a braid, like the way braided hair would look. It kind of looks like that, but it's supposed to be a hand-carved piece of wood that's been made into a cane. And I'm adding too much highlight here, so I'm actually planning on going back over it, and I do by the end of this video. I go back over it with some more Van Dyke Brown. So now we're moving on to the infamous raincoat here. And I struggled a lot with this, you guys. I'm not gonna lie. It was very, very challenging to try to figure out where the midtone and the highlight would be. I struggled with this for several hours and did a lot of troubleshooting and reassessments, and that's the best thing you can do when you're, especially when you're putting a lot of effort into something and it's just not looking and it's not turning out the way that you expected it to. Best thing to do is stop for a second, step back, really look at what you're putting in, what you're painting, and start asking certain questions like, why is this not working? Why do I think it should work? What can I try to do to improve the look of it? But I've always been told that one of the most challenging things to paint or draw is clothing, because unless you have a reference, you're actually looking at something. It can get extremely mind-bending, and it can turn into a real head scratcher, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out where all these folds in the cloth itself should be. And if you can find where all of the folds are supposed to be, for it to actually look right and look accurate and look realistic, then you have to focus on what sections need to be highlighted. And well, because I didn't have any reference or anything to look at, I wasn't basing this off of anything that I actually looked at. I just kind of used my imagination, and that's why I was having so much of an issue with it. And I initially thought that, what I'm doing here, I initially thought that the more detail I added to it, the better it would look. The more folds that I put in the actual raincoat itself, with the creases and everything, I thought that it would look better and better the more I did that. Well, it turns out that it started looking worse and worse and worse and worse. So that's when I decided to try to simplify some of these folds. It took me a while to realize that just because it made sense in my head didn't necessarily mean that it was going to look good. So I wrestled with it for several hours. When I was blocking it in, I didn't seem to have too many issues with it. All the detail that I added in the block-in phase, which isn't a whole lot of detail, I was basically trying to go by that. But because this is the detailing phase, I wanted to try to add more detail, and it ended up not looking so great. So as you can see here, all that detail I'm adding in right there, it just doesn't look right. And what I should have done is I should have thought, because I didn't have anything to look at and use as a reference, I should have thought about the consistency of this raincoat. I should have considered it a little bit more, because as I said before, this is one of those old fashioned kind of raincoats. It's very old, and just from doing a little bit of research on it, I'm pretty sure that those older raincoats were made out of like PVC. And that's kind of I don't want to say rigid, but it's a pretty tough material. It's not like standard cloth. It's not like cotton or anything else like that. It's really not going to have a whole lot of creases in it, or a whole lot of areas where it folds up. Not nearly as much as I'm trying to portray there. So as I moved on, I kind of started making the sections a little bit bigger. And again, I'm sorry for sticking the back of my head in your face the whole time. I got to come up with a better strategy as far as where I'm going to put my camera. So a lot of this I actually removed from the video because I don't think it's really necessary to keep it in there. But I just wanted to show you some of the different things I was trying, just to get it to look halfway decent. But then I moved on to the pants, and they're this Van Dyke brown color, kind of like dark brown khakis, I guess you could say. And well, I'm using the same method that I used on the jacket, which is actually the same thing. that I did with the rocks there. And what I'm doing is I'm going in first of all with a coat of Payne's gray, and then I'm adding the mid-tone, which would be the Van Dyke brown, and then I'm adding titanium white that's mixed with the blending glaze medium. And it seemed to work a little bit better with the pants than it did with the jacket. And what I'm really trying to do here is I'm trying to make it convincing that his leg is lifted up and it's bent. And that's pretty challenging to do as well. It's definitely not the best painted bent leg that you've probably seen. but I tried, and I was satisfied with what I got. It was the stance that he's in, the pose that he's actually standing in right there. He's actually walking, but it's not something that's really easy to draw, and it's even harder to paint something like that. But I'm trying to use the highlight to my advantage. I'm trying to use the highlight to base how his leg is positioned right there. His left leg was much easier, much faster to paint because it's clearly straight and he's standing. He's actually putting his weight on his left leg on that bottom step down there. I'm also trying to highlight the areas more where his knees are so that you can clearly see, or I'm trying to make it convincing that, you know, the fabric is kind of pressed up against his knees. It gets very complex actually between when you're trying to paint or draw the human form. It gets very complicated between, you know, like there's a difference between painting nudes or drawing nudes and actually painting or drawing people that are wearing clothes. And it's kind of a mixture between the human form and what the physical material of clothing is going to do. You kind of have to balance the areas where the clothing is going to be fitting loose on the body versus where it's going to be pressed up against certain parts of the body. So I kind of tried to keep that in mind whenever I was doing the knees, painting the knees. This lantern here, I've also been avoiding it for a while, but it was finally time to try to give it some detail. I wanted to make it red, but I figured that it would be kind of, you know, parts of it were going to be kind of dark, and only certain parts of it would be visibly red. The parts that the actual flame inside of it would be lighting up. So I made most of it a darker color. That's like permanent red mixed with I believe it's burnt umber. This is one part that I wish I had more time to work on, this flame here. I'm not real happy with the orange that I put in there. That's permanent red mixed with cadmium yellow, I believe, and I actually tried to go back over it with some medium yellow, the same color yellow that I used to do the lighthouse. Right here, I'm just trying to highlight the various internal parts of the lantern itself. Okay, now it's time to screw up Tiberius's face. I mean detail Tiberius's face. So right there, I was trying to show you that I have several different paints that I'm laying out, and I start out with his hands. Actually, I'm trying to lay in a shadow here, and the colors I'm going to use to do this and his face are just various mixtures of ivory black, permanent red, Van Dyke brown, and I have this other color. It's called flesh tint, but you actually don't need the flesh tint color to make skin tone. It helps, but it's not necessary to make skin tone. And right here, I've actually got this color. It's just a variable between all the colors I just mentioned, but I've got a lot of glaze in it. And what I'm doing is I'm just redefining the shapes of the knuckles and the fingers, the bones in the fingers. And I'm only highlighting various areas. The rest of it has that undertone, shadowed kind of color. And this helps with adding detail. It kind of just redefines and it forms the shape of the hands in general. Okay, but now it's time to, like I said, detail Tiberius's face, and I made some mistakes here that I want to kind of go over. So I wanted to start out with making the nostrils and the pupils darker, as well as the retina of his eyes. I wanted to give him like hazel colored eyes, so I used some burnt sienna to do that. And here's where I made the mistake. I made the mistake of outlining the eyes, and I shouldn't have done that. And you're going to see whenever I outline his eyes, it completely changes the shape of his eyes, and they suddenly get much, much smaller. And I actually ended up going down a rabbit trail with this because I tried to fix it, and then whenever I tried to fix it, I actually screwed it up and made it worse. I didn't film any of that, but you just have to be really careful when you're adding detail to a face. Right here, I've got the same color I used to shadow the hands mixed with the glaze, and I'm basically going to go over the whole left side of his face because it's the side that is furthest away from that lantern, and I'm basically just trying to add shadow here. So I'm going over it with the glaze, and then I'm going to clean my brush and go back over it again and try to pick up some of that color that I just laid in with the glaze. And because the glaze makes paint transparent, it's actually very easy and it's very effective to do this. So you see right there that the left side of his face looks like it's more immersed in shadow at this point. See, I just added some ivory black to the bottom of his eye there, and it's starting to look like he's wearing eyeliner. So I had to fix that. This is the point where I had to work on the mouth, and whenever I was blocking his face in, the paint was too wet for me to actually work on his mouth, so I had to wait until now to do it. And guys, this is the first time I've ever painted a person. So I'm kind of experimenting here. I can't really give you a tutorial on how to do these things because I'm not really sure how to do these things. I'm just going by what makes sense to me. So if he starts looking like he's wearing lipstick and eyeliner, it's because I don't know what I'm doing. So I have to figure out how to fix this stuff after I paint it in. I have to figure out how to fix it, and that's, well, pretty much what I tried to do off camera. But I wanted to keep this in here just to show you what not to do when you're painting a face. Some of it I think I nailed on the point where I blocked everything in, but some of it I struggled with a lot. It's very difficult painting faces. It can get very difficult. It can get very complex. The colors that you're using, the fact that you have to tone everything to conform to the shapes of the face, it gets complicated for sure. But I had fun doing this. It was a little bit frustrating when I realized that I messed his eyes up, and I panicked a little bit. But you'll see in a minute how I fixed it in the end. And I really liked the shape of his eyes before I did all this, but I did fix it to where it looks better. See right there, all the eyeliner's gone and the lipstick is gone. So that's what I ended up with in the end, and I decided that I didn't want to mess with it anymore because I was super paranoid about messing it up again, and it took a long time for me to fix those problems. This is something that I plan on progressing with and improving with down the road. I'm going to continue to paint portraits. I enjoy it. It's very, very fun. It's challenging, but it's very fun to do. So I'm laying in some ivory black here for the undertone of the mustache and the beard. But he actually, you'll come to find that he actually does not have a black beard. He's short on his supply of Just for Men. So he's gone gray. He's an older fellow. Like I said before, he's probably in his mid-50s. So he's actually very gray. And I wanted to portray this, so instead of using the Payne's gray here, which you might have assumed that I used since I used it on everything else, I didn't use Payne's gray here because it has a bluish color in it, and I didn't want to have that in his beard, so I actually just used ivory black and titanium white, mixed it together, and used quite a bit of the glaze once again, because the glaze thins the paint down to a consistency of ink, and so it actually makes it a lot easier for you to make fine details. So right here, I'm just trying to add in some of the last tweaks of the painting before it's complete. And I added a little bit of titanium white and medium yellow to the outside of that lantern, just to try to suggest that it's casting some ambient light out around it. And I'm going in on the lantern itself and his jacket. And trying to add some of that yellow to it. And right here, I'm actually going back over the cane with some Van Dyke brown. Because like I said before, it had too much white. I added too much highlight to it. So I'm just kind of repeating the same steps. This time around, I'm not adding as much white though, so it has more of a brown color to it. It's more saturated this time. Now this is when I start to go back to that medium yellow titanium white with the glaze, and I decided that I'm gonna have a little bit of light from that lantern reflecting off of some of these rocks. So this is an example of how you can use glaze to highlight as well as shadow. This is kind of using it for the opposite reason, but it is possible. I've heard it said before that you can't use glaze to highlight, but clearly you can, and I'm proving it here. I just wanted to suggest that that lantern there, it's causing its light to reflect off of certain surfaces, and it is easy to go overboard with this and add too much highlight. So what you want to do is really take your time, step back often, and look at what you're doing, and consider the surface of everything that you're wanting to add highlight to, and ask the question, is it facing the light source? In my case, the light source is that lantern, so that's what I'm doing. I'm asking, you know, as I'm filling in parts of the jacket here with the same thing, I'm asking myself, you know, is this surface facing, is it at an angle where it's facing that lantern and actually able to reflect some of that light? I did the same thing with the rocks. And overall, I think it's a really cool effect. It just adds to it. It makes it look more realistic. And it's very easy to do. It doesn't take long at all to highlight with glaze. And like I said before, it makes the consistency of the paint so thin that you're really able to add some really fine details with it. So I'm going to continue doing what I was doing to the rocks here. Just kind of spreading that light out on certain surfaces. Notice I'm not hitting every single rock. I'm going over certain rocks that I feel are at that angle to actually pick up some of that light on their surface. Now I'm doing the same thing to the pants. I'm trying to, you know, trying to add to that effect of his bent leg and make it look more like his leg is bent there. Then I did the same thing to the reflection in the boots. Those are just black rubber boots. They're very glossy, so they're going to pick up quite a bit of the highlight they're going to pick up quite a bit of the light from that lantern. And then I just give them a second coat of ivory black after that. And we're getting very, very close to the end at this point. I basically just kept going until I ran out of things to do. I ran out of ideas or ways to add to the painting. Right here, I'm trying to disperse some of the light coming from that lighthouse because, like I said before in a previous video, there's quite a bit of fog out there and it's going to break up some of that light. So what I'm doing right here, I thought it was pretty clever. I'm varying the mixture that I'm adding to the yellow there as the clouds behind the light source, or behind the rays of light change. I'm varying what I'm adding into that yellow, and it creates a pretty cool effect. You'll see it. And then here's something that I debated with from the beginning of the painting, and that was whether or not I should add lightning. Now, I basically just looked at some reference photos of lightning, and I decided that yes, the way that those clouds in the background are highlighted, I figured that it would accent, that adding lightning would accent great to those clouds in the background. So again, this is just titanium white mixed with a lot of the glaze to give it that ink-like consistency. Poor Tiberius, all hell is breaking loose for him, but you know, you see the look on his face. He's cool and calm and kosher. He's a lighthouse keeper. For him, this is just another day at work. But man, this is a chaotic storm, and this sea is really under siege by this storm. I found adding the lightning here to be very, very fun, and it's something that you can, if you're not careful, you can get carried away with it and actually put too much. And I may be guilty of that here, but I think it looks pretty good. And last part is signing the painting. It's done, you guys. Alright everyone, we have reached the end of another painting. So glad and so relieved to be done with this one. This one, I will say, took me by surprise. It has its limitations due to the deadline that I had in making it, but I think I pulled it off pretty well. And this is a milestone for me because it marks the beginning of several things. This was a first time painting, like a first time for many things. I'll go into that a little bit, I suppose, if you want to stick around and hear me talk about it and look at it some more. But this was the first time I have ever transferred a drawing onto a canvas and actually painted it. And I will say that that has a lot to do with the reason why I got it done so quickly. And I think I got it done extremely quickly. I was expecting it to take much, much longer than it actually took to get it done. I started this painting 2 weeks and 2 days ago. And in that first video, the concept video, I was telling you guys that it was going to take me an extremely long time to get it done, and that I wouldn't even be able to get it done in a month. Well, it turns out I got it done in half a month. And that's not even, you know, I wasn't even working on it every day. I didn't start working on it every day until I got back from my trip out in the truck. But it is done. and I'm so glad that it's done. Okay, so it was a first time for me to ever do that. Another first is that I've never actually done a painting with a figure in it. I've never painted a person. Even though he's a fictional person, it's a fictional setting, it all came out of my head. It was all conceived in my brain. You know, I just came up with all of it whenever I did that there. And so, it's the first time I've ever done that. I do want to, in the future, do portraiture and try to paint some portraits of my kids and try to do a self-portrait. I jokingly told my wife that I would do the self-portrait first. That way, if I screwed it up, I wouldn't offend anybody. So I'm planning on doing that. I will say that I really enjoyed painting Tiberius. It was a lot of fun painting him. I really liked blocking his face in, and like I said, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to film that portion of that day, but I really enjoyed it. And another first, this is the last one, but this is the first time I've ever painted ocean waves. And I had a lot of fun doing that too. It took me a couple of tries to get it, but I'm happy with the way it looks. By the way, I know I said I was going to make that darker, but when you consider the lightning, which is also another first, I've never painted lightning before. When you consider all the light, you know, the lighthouse, the lantern, the lightning, I don't think the waves really need to be darker than they are. I don't think any of it needs to be darker than it is. I mean, if anything, the parts of the rock here that I highlighted with the glaze could stand to use some more highlight in some places, but you know, it's fine the way it is. And this whole painting, like I said when I did the concept, it tells a story and it has some deep meaning behind it, and I'm going to describe and explain what that is in the next video. There's going to be a very special episode coming tomorrow. It's not going to have any painting in it, but I'm basically taking this painting to the person that I made it for tomorrow, and that's why I had to have it done by tomorrow. Some of you guys might know what tomorrow is, and you might already know which direction I'm going in. So yeah, I just want to thank you guys for watching this long video. If you stuck with me, I appreciate it. Stay tuned for more painting vlogs. I already have the third painting, the next painting, planned out. I already know what I'm going to do. I'm going to start on it probably next week. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you guys around. Alright, Jared signing out with Why Do the Nations Rage? So on and so forth. Catch you next time, and happy painting.